I'm so happy to meet you.
Great to meet you too. You look great.
You too.
Great to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm excited for our conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for your documentary and all of your work.
No, it's been my honor. So shall we go?
Yes.
Okay. Watch your step, please. Hi, I'm Nikole Hannah-Jones.
I'm Tatyana Ali, and this is the Storytellers Spotlight.
Thank you so much. It's so good to meet you in person, just watching you on television. So much of my own childhood, but also hearing about your story, your own traumatic birthing story that's so reflective of so many Black women in this country.
Thank you for your work. That second episode, getting into the history that affects what we experience now, that generational trauma. You just hit so many points. Why we weren't safe and how we could have had a totally different experience if we were in different hands.
That's right. For the women, the Black women who made that episode, of all the episodes in the documentary series, I think that one was the most triggering, because so often when we talk about slavery and its legacy, we talk about the physical labor of working in the fields, right, or the physical labor of working in the house. And I think we almost have not psychologically wanted to deal with the other labor that Black women were being forced to do, which is the labor of procreating, right?
Yes.
The labor of maintaining slavery through their very wombs and all of the sexual violence that Black women had to go through, but also the high rates of maternal and infant mortality that of course would happen when women are having to carry children while doing this extremely strenuous work with very little nutrition, that sort of thing. It really was important for us to focus an entire episode on telling the story of slavery through Black women, which we just don't spend enough time doing. Yeah. And thinking about the way, your own story, your own birthing story, you're entering the system that is seeing you as a Black woman in a certain way, that is seeing Black babies in a certain way, and yet we're not taught how that system was created, and that what you're experiencing isn't just an individual story, but it is a generational collective story. What was it like when you first found out that you were having a baby?
Oh, I was so excited. I've always wanted to be a mom. When I met my partner, when I met Vaughn, we fell in love and we got engaged. And then months after we got engaged, we found out we were pregnant. And we were so excited. It felt like, all my dreams were coming true. All my dreams were coming true.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how was your pregnancy overall?
It was really nice. I mean, I had a little bit of morning sickness here and there, but I was, I remember being told by my OBGYN, oh, you're boring. There's nothing going on. I had a very healthy pregnancy. It was really planning for birth. That was where questions were not answered. That was kind of like the iffy period. I remember asking my OBGYN, well, what if I want to be, what about positions? What about, and this is my first baby,
right?
What if I want to move? Are you okay with that? I'm trying to, given the information that I had, which wasn't really all the information that I needed. That's why I've told my story, because I want us to have the information that we need. He told me, yeah, you can hang from the ceiling if you want. You can hang from the lights. And, it was funny, but it was also dismissive because I wanted to have a real conversation about what my birthing experience was going to be like in the hospital. Really not knowing what was going on, really not knowing what Black women were experiencing. That was like 7 years ago. And asked about doulas, because that's a term that I had heard. What is that? What does that mean? And he suggested a doula that he had worked with very often. When I went into labor and it came time to go to the hospital, my OBGYN wasn't there. That happens often, you know, this lack of continuity of care. There were other people from his office who attended. And I had very normal labor, so I've learned now from midwives and from people that work in reproductive justice. First time labor can be 24 hours. It can take time. It does take time. I had a normal labor, and I remember falling asleep in and out of it in the hospital, and they would wake me up and say, do you want an epidural? You should have an epidural. You should have an epidural. Now my birth plan was, I wrote it out, you know. Ivy League grad, I would write everything out, you know, my A personality. My husband and I had planned it, and we gave it to everybody. Nobody paid attention to that, you know. And they kept asking, and they kept asking, and then I remember the third or fourth time that they woke me up to talk about the epidural was to say, you know, if you don't take the epidural, we're afraid that you're not going to have enough energy when it's time to push. Which, when I look back, I find that to be so interesting because I was asleep. You woke me up to tell me that.
All right.
I was sleeping through a lot of the beginnings of labor. That speaks to these unnecessary interventions that happen, you know, the in general over-medicalization of birth.
When I was pregnant, and we are, you know, educated women, we have income, we're reading probably, I imagine you're like me, reading obsessively on childbirth and trying to get as much knowledge. I'm watching documentaries, right, about birthing. So on the one hand, I'm like very conscious of racial disparity. I know that you measure it, Black women have it harder, and that's no different in birth, but I'm also feeling like, you know, I have resources, I have good insurance, I have all of these things that hopefully will mitigate some of that. And it sounds like very similar to you. I wanted to try to have as natural of a birth as possible. I mean, I remember being scared, like carrying the baby, that something might go wrong, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what might go wrong during the actual childbirth. How was that for you? Was that similar?
I thought that the hospital was the safest place.
Yes.
You know, and these little things that I'm bringing up to you now, these little, I don't know what to call them in the hospital setting, if they're called microaggressions or whatever. I actually deal with them all the time in my life, at work,
Right.
at the grocery store. You know, these things that we just kind of move through, move past. And I treated my health experience the same way. I moved through them. That's a space where you can't play, where those things, you can't just move through them. You have to stop what's happening and maybe move providers. I really thought the hospital would be safe.
And it's a hard position to be in because these are medical professionals.
Yes.
And when they're telling you medically, I think this is what you should do, you don't feel like you can really argue or disagree, right? You're like, I'm in a hospital, and so if you tell me to do this, because the fear, of course, is always, if I don't do it, I'm going to do something that hurts my child, right?
Absolutely, because nobody cares about my baby more than me.
That's right.
Nobody cares about the health of my child more than I do. And if you're telling me that this will ensure his safety,
Yes.
I'm gonna do it, you know? So yeah, you believe them. You're being guided. You're also in the throes of labor.
Yes.
And in a different part of your brain, you know.
It's primal.
It's very primal. It's very primal.
So you had a plan.
Yeah, I had a plan.
And your plan was pretty much being disregarded.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're telling you to get an epidural, so what happens?
I said I agreed, and I got the epidural. And I did sleep through, like they said. When he came down far enough, and it was time to push, that's when really the chaos started. I wanted to move. He was, I could feel his hair. He was at the lowest station. And it says that in my records. And I could feel his hair, I could see him. And I'm pushing, I could feel one leg, I couldn't feel the other, I could half feel the other.
So one of your legs had gone numb.
Yeah, from the epidural, but one I could feel, and I kept trying, when I tried to move, I kept trying to move, I wanted to move position. And, you know, once you have an epidural, the hospital doesn't allow you to move.
Okay.
For insurance reasons, for whatever their reasons are. And they pinned me down.
Like physically?
They physically held me down. They physically held my feet down. They physically held my arms down. People were...
What are you thinking? Like, what are you feeling? So you're being restrained by multiple people.
I'm being restrained by multiple people. There are about 4 or 5 people in front of me screaming, yelling at me, you know, commands at me and all sorts of things. My husband was with me. He was completely, it was just a complete circus. One doctor came around, stood up on the bed, and he jammed his forearm into the top of right under my chest, and started squeezing down from the top, from over the bed, the hospital bed, pushing and pushing. And I can't tell you what I was thinking, because it's just not out of body experience, but it's just a state of panic. And this went on, and they asked if they could use forceps, and we said no. They asked if they could use suction. This is while I'm being held down. They won't let me move. We kind of looked at each other and said, okay, you know, they put the suction on his head, and I heard it, I'm sorry, but I heard it go, but this loud, like, pop. And it must have happened like 3 or 4 times. And I remember screaming, like, stop! Like, I knew that there was no one was there to help me. You know? Nobody was there to help me. And midwives that I've spoken to afterwards, they've said, like, you could have leaned on somebody and turned up. It's not unusual for a woman to have to move positions to push. It's actually very unusual to be able to lay down on your back and give birth to a baby.
Exactly.
It says in my records that I was too tired, and that's not what happened. I told them to stop because they were going to hurt him. And I said, stop. And then something came from something that I read where I never thought about this when I walked in to when I chose that place. I'm in a hospital, they know how to do C-sections. Right. I'm in a hospital. That's what they know how to do. That's why they can't help me. So I said, stop. I can't remember the exact conversation. The next thing that happened, she pushed him back inside me.
So your son's head was out?
Yes, ma'am. Getting ready to talk to you today, over the course of the last week or so, my legs have been in such pain. And I asked my husband, like, what is going on? It's like, and it's because I remember that feeling. I remember that feeling. And my body, I shook really violently, and then I was out. That was it, out. And the next thing I remember is hearing a cry. And Vaughn was over me, and just, you know, when I was just so in panic and distraught himself, and I said, I think that's our baby. I think that's our baby, because I was kind of out of it. And I said, go, go, go. We weren't safe. We weren't in safe hands. I don't know how to express that enough.
So you need him, because you don't trust the doctors who are supposed to be caring for you or your baby.
No, I wanted
Vaughn
him to be there with the baby.
Put his eyes on your child.
Yes, absolutely.
Even as he's worried about, are you okay?
Yes, yes. I would give my life for my children.
Yes.
You know, they're mine.
And you know, as you say that, unfortunately,
People don't know that about us.
they
Is
don't
that what
know
you're
that.
gonna say?
No, but that's what too many Black women end up doing.
I know. I
Which
know.
you also know, right?
I know. Absolutely.
Is that the
Absolutely. I
birthing
know.
process for us is not safe, as you say.
Absolutely. Because we're not listened to. We're not believed. The fact that we do want the best for our children.
Yes.
People don't know that. Some people don't know that. They don't believe that.
That's right.
My oldest son had to spent 4 days in the NICU because he couldn't urinate on his own. They did all sorts of tests, and the pediatric urologist, I remember her coming into the room, an Indian woman. I remember her coming into the room, and her face, there was such sadness and like empathy in her face. And she said, I read your birth record. I read the report. And she said, I think we're dealing with the trauma of his birth. Let me, flood him with IVs, almost flood his system with hydration. And that ended up working. When we left the hospital, it was in the dead of night, because as soon as he wet that diaper, as soon as we had a wet diaper, I was like, we have to get out of here. I don't know what else is going to happen.
Get your baby and go.
Mm-hmm. You talked about lactation in that episode. I'm like one of the first women in my family to breastfeed for as long as I did. Everybody was told we didn't have enough milk. Really not. Breastfeeding wasn't something that we did for long periods of time. And so that was really important to me, and went through that whole process. And it wasn't until I was pregnant again with my youngest that I was just in such terror about going through that again, that I went on a journey similar to what I saw in your film of educating myself, finding some other way. And I found just an incredible community of midwives and reproductive justice advocates and Black women researchers, and just a world of people who are trying to make this better for us. I found my midwife, Rachel Lawler, and I can't tell you how it was like night and day.
Can I see? Yes, I'm gonna put on the diaper. Yeah, I'm used to it.
The woman who is giving birth, I'm trying to even imagine how they push a child back inside of a mother. And if they're even explaining to you what is happening, I just can't even imagine the fear that you must have felt. So after all of this, did any of the people attending you come in and talk to you about what you had experienced?
No, there wasn't. It's normal. There was no mention of any of that. No. It's like it just happened, and that was it.
So what did you do to try, to take those lessons from your other experience and change what your experience would be the second time?
I think some of it was divine interventions. I told you I was going through my lactation journey and really kind of breaking that generational trauma of not breastfeeding.
Yes.
And I shared that on my social media and shared what like aunties were saying, and, oh, that baby's too old.
Yes.
Oh, 3 months. I mean, doesn't he have teeth? Like, that kind of, and, saying, nope, World Health Organization says to 2. I remember I had like a quote that I would tell people when they had something to say about that. I was looking for community, and so I posted about it. And sometime afterwards, Black Mamas Matter Alliance reached out to me to be on a panel and to talk about, my lactation journey. They had no idea. I hadn't shared anything else. I became pregnant after that invitation, and I was 2 months pregnant when I was there at the panel, and in a kind of a state of terror, like I told you about, not knowing what I was going to do or where. And I found myself in a room in Atlanta of 300 reproductive justice advocates and Black and brown midwives and indigenous reproductive justice advocates and researchers, and I was just looking out at the crowd like, oh my God, thank you. And it was very early in my pregnancy. I was 2 months pregnant. So in my family, like, we don't really say anything until about 3 months, after the first trimester. I was just so grateful because I didn't know that they existed, that there were so many. Through the pregnancy with my youngest, I went to conferences. I just learned as much as I could because I wanted someone with loving hands to touch me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you see me and you don't see your sister or your mother or somebody who's worth caring for, then I didn't want them to touch me. That's all I wanted. And that community took me in. They were there to teach me. I learned about our history. I learned why. I learned about implicit bias. I learned that being pinned down is very much like the shackling that was done, that is still being done in prisons around the country. And it made it make sense, I knew what to protect myself and my family from, and I ended up finding a midwife. And I'm going to tell you something else that's interesting. I planned a home birth because I didn't want to go to a hospital. But I had this amazing midwife who asked me every time she touched my belly before, can I touch you? She got to know my family. She knew my history. And we planned this home birth. Babies come as they come, right?
Yes.
Because that's life. And my son went lateral, right at my due date. She gave me choices along the way. So we chose a hospital that my midwife knew would be respectful, would understand. And I ended up having a C-section again, but a very, very different experience. An experience where my bodily autonomy was respected. Nobody put hands on me. I had choices. Me and my husband made those choices along the way. Because that's what this is about.
More so your humanity. That's what you are seeking, what we're all seeking. When you hear your story or Serena Williams' story, all these Black women's stories, any individual story, you can say, well, anybody can have a bad birthing experience.
Sure.
But then you have to add up the collective stories, and that there's a reason Black women in America are dying at the rates of underdeveloped countries. There's a reason why our infant mortality rates of our children are the highest in the industrialized world, that it is the common story of our humanity being taken for granted, of our pain not being seen the same, which we know based off of decades of studies that those ideas about Black women's pain, about Black women's bodies, about Black women's worth, which began with J. Marion Sims when he's experimenting on enslaved Black women against their will, all of those are still part of our medical system. And so what you were trying to do was to be with people who you didn't have to prove your innate humanity to, but also that you could trust to see you for who you are, and that believe in Black women as caretakers and worthy. It's like these things that other women get to take for granted, we don't. So when I hear that story of your second birth, that's what you were seeking. You can have all the information in the world, but does the person who's caring for you see your humanity? This has been the Black woman struggle. So what about that experience drives you now, and your decision to share publicly what you went through, your decision to advocate on behalf of other Black women who don't have the same platform and visibility as you? Why is this so important to you?
Because it's too much of a common experience. When I started sharing my story, even in small groups, everybody, we all have some kind of story. It's so common. It's so normal.
Yes.
I also started to hear younger Black women saying that they were afraid to even think about starting a family because of the ways that our stories are sometimes told. They're afraid. So we know that many hospitals are not safe, but we don't hear in the same breath there is work being done and places and people
That's right.
who know. It's not a mystery, right? It's not a mystery what we need. It's not a mystery what would change the outcomes, abate the trauma and the pain. We know, they know. That's why when I share my story, I share both of my births, because there is a better way. We deserve to feel our full power.
Yes.
That's our right as we move into motherhood, because birth is not just about birthing a baby, a mother gets birth too. We have a light to fight for. We need that. We need that. And I want repair. There's the omnibus bill that's coming up. It's come up before. That is repair. More midwives, more doulas, Medicaid coverage, continuity of coverage throughout pregnancy, birth, postpartum, being able to report disrespect and abuse in the hospital. Lactation support. So much of it is covered in that bill. That bill has to be passed in its entirety. And we need a groundswell of people to understand what's going on, to understand that there are places in this country, urban and rural, that are, they're called maternity care deserts, where people don't have they don't even have some place to go. You don't even have some place to go to be cared for when you're pregnant. It's not right. It's not right. I've been acting since I was 4 years old. I've been singing for people, making people laugh. Maybe they chose the wrong one this time. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
I think they did.
You know what I mean?
I think they did.
If I can do all that, then I can be honest and because it's wrong. It's wrong. Everybody, people, we know. So whatever that encouragement is, whatever that inspiration is, whatever that stirring of the heart is that I can help push this forward through, move minds and hearts so that people pick up the phone and call their congressperson and say, pass the omnibus bill. Pass it, all of it. Click. That does really work. That's what it takes.
One thing that I hope people take away from the 1619 Project series, from your story, is there's nothing wrong with Black women, right?
No.
There's nothing physiological about our bodies that make us more prone to death and our children more prone to death. There's nothing psychologically wrong with us. There's nothing pathological wrong with Black women. You know, my good friend Andre Perry, I quote him every time I give a talk because he says there's nothing wrong with Black people that getting rid of racism won't resolve. And I think it's so important to make clear that we should not be having the outcomes that we have, that Black women and Black children are dying needlessly in the wealthiest country in the world, because we can't get over our past and how that past shapes what type of care the society thinks we as Black women and our children are deserving of.
Yes.
So that anger you feel, I think anger can be a tremendous motivator. And a lot of times as Black women, we're made to believe that we can't show anger, right? But you should be angry, right? We should be angry that we're dying in childbirth, that our children are dying in childbirth in completely preventable ways. But it's how you use that anger. And you can see the pain is still there and fresh, but hopefully that pain gives you purpose, and it looks like you are living a new purpose because of what you experienced.
I found my healing in sharing. That's how I found out I wasn't alone.
Yes.
And I found my healing in other Black women.
Yes.
From all walks of life, from all over this country. I found my healing with indigenous midwives that spent the time to talk to me and share their experience too. We're the answer. We are. We are. And when we come into community with each other,
that's our power.
that's
right?
our power. Yeah.
So I think in all of this, we don't want to feel powerless over the outcomes of our births. And what you found is a community that allows us to take control of what happens in our lives.
That's right.
And that is power. And love.
And love. And love.